3 years ago, he lost everything: his land, his family, and his hope. Then, in a dusty saloon, a single poker hand changed his fate forever. He didn't just win a game. He won a secret that could destroy them all. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild frontier stories. Now, hold tight. This is a ride you won't forget. I still remember the stink of sweat and spilled whiskey that night. The flickering oil lamps painted every cracked wall of that saloon in ghostlight, shadows crawling across the warped floorboards like rats in heat. I hadn't planned to sit at that table. Hell, I hadn't planned to do much of anything that night except drown what was left of my pride in cheap bourbon. But the world doesn't care for a man's plans, and Deadwood never slept. Not really. The cards felt heavier than they should have, sweat clinging to the back of my neck as I turned them over. Outside, rain had turned the street to a river of mud, the kind that swallowed boots and wagons alike. But it wasn't the weather that had me spooked. It was the eyes watching from every dark corner. Men with guns in their coats, men with debts on their backs. Men like me. I was a rancher once, or tried to be. Silver Creek Ranch had belonged to my father before me, and might have belonged to my son one day, if life had been kinder. But kindness is as rare out here as green pastures in July. One bad season led to another, cattle dying on their feet, and me begging the bank to buy me just a little more time. Pride made me promise my wife, Roslyn, that I'd find a way. And that promise dragged me here, to this table, in a saloon where even the walls smelled like broken men. When I looked up, that's when I saw him, Clay Roar. Last time I'd seen Roar, there'd been blood on the floor and a revolver between us. Years hadn't softened him. His grin was still all teeth and no soul, his eyes still the color of something rotten. He welcomed me like a brother, but it was the welcome of a snake uncoiling to strike. And I, a fool, sat down anyway. They dealt the cards. My heart thudded in my ears so loud I could barely hear the laughter and piano off-key behind me. The buy-in was more than I had, so Roar, always the generous devil, offered me an alternative. "High stakes tonight, Turner," he purred, and out of the shadows they dragged her. A girl, barely 13 if that, thin as a rail but with eyes like flint. Black hair tangled over her shoulders, her dress hanging in tatters. Yet when our gazes locked, she didn't look away. No tears, no begging, just cold defiance. Wolf eyes, I thought. The kind you see in critters that been hunted too long to trust a hand, even a gentle one. Roar told me she owed him. Said she was collateral. Win, and she was mine. Lose, and I'd leave emptier than I came. My gut twisted at the thought of gambling for a child. But my mind was already shackled by desperation, by Roslyn's tired eyes waiting back home, by the fence posts rotting in my pasture and cattle too weak to stand. I played. Lord knows I played like the devil himself was on my shoulder. When I laid down my full house, the room sucked in a single breath. Roar's grin cracked, and for the first time, I saw something like surprise in those dead eyes of his. The girl didn't move, just kept staring at me, unblinking. I gathered my meager winnings, pushed back my chair, and said, "I didn't come for this, but I ain't leaving her here." My voice felt like gravel in my throat. She stepped forward, as if she'd already known I'd win. Maybe she did. Outside, the night hit us like a hammer. The rain had stopped, but mud clung to my boots, sucking at every step. I didn't even know her name then. Didn't know anything about the ledger tucked away in her rags, or the devils who'd come hunting for it. All I knew was I'd just gambled the last scrap of my soul, and the prize was a child with nothing but secrets in her eyes. The wagon wheels moaned under the weight of every mistake I'd ever made as we rattled out of Deadwood. The girl sat beside me, knees pulled tight to her chest, chin raised in quiet defiance. The wind tugged at her hair, and the lantern hanging by the driver's seat swung with every jolt, sending wild shadows dancing over her sharp features. For a while, neither of us spoke. Words felt too heavy, too dangerous. My ranch lay west, tucked into a fold of hills most folks only saw when they were lost or running. Silver Creek Ranch. Once, the sign over the gate had been painted white, letters bold and proud. Now the paint peeled like sunburned skin, and the boards leaned tiredly, as if ready to collapse at the next hard wind. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind wandered to Roslyn. What would she see first when we rolled up? A husband who'd gambled his pride for a stranger? Or the stranger herself, a child hard as iron nails, with secrets coiled behind those wolf eyes? She didn't ask where we were going, didn't ask why I'd taken her from that saloon. After a mile or so, her gaze drifted to the distant hills, and she spoke in a voice as dry and cracked as old timber. "Why'd you do it?" she asked, without looking at me. "Why take me?" I swallowed, feeling my mouth turn to dust. "Couldn't leave you there," I said. "A man's got to live with himself come morning." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but it faded before it could bloom. She turned her head back to the road. The silence settled in again, but it felt softer this time. As the ranch came into view, the girl studied it like a scout sizing up enemy ground. The barn leaned under the weight of years, the fences sagged, and patches of bare earth showed where grass once grew thick. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney of the house, promising warmth but no comfort. Roslyn stepped out onto the porch as the wagon creaked to a halt, her arms folded across her chest, the evening sun painting gold into the loose strands of her hair. Even from where I sat, I could see the worry in her eyes. I climbed down and offered the girl a hand, but she ignored it, swinging herself off the wagon with surprising grace. She landed lightly, boots sinking a little into the mud. Roslyn's gaze fell on her, sharp as a blade. "Who's this?" she asked me, voice tight. "Her name's Clara," I said quickly, though truth be told, I wasn't sure if that was her real name. "She'll help around the ranch." Roslyn's frown deepened. "She's a child, Eli." I had no answer that would satisfy her. Instead, I busied myself with the wagon, untying the last of the supplies we'd scraped together. Clara stood her ground, shoulders squared, chin lifted. No apology in her posture, no plea for kindness. Roslyn sighed, a sound of surrender more than welcome. "Well," she murmured, "we'll talk later." She nodded toward the door. "Come on, girl. Wash up." Inside, the smell of wood smoke and old coffee wrapped around us. The hearth glowed faintly, and a patched quilt hung over the back of a chair by the fire. Clara moved through the room carefully, like a feral thing testing the air for traps. She barely blinked when Roslyn handed her a bowl of stew, and she ate with small, quick bites, as if afraid someone might snatch it away. That night, lying in bed, the old boards creaking under my weight, I listened to the wind clawing at the shutters. Somewhere down the hall, Clara slept, or didn't. Hard to imagine a child like that resting easy anywhere. I wondered what stories her scars could tell, if only scars could speak. Morning came grey and cold. The kind of dawn that turns breath into mist and makes bones ache before you've even climbed from bed. I found Clara already outside, sleeves rolled, eyes scanning the yard. "Storm's coming," she said, her words flat, like she was reciting facts from memory. "How do you know?" I asked. She shrugged. "I just do." We worked the day side by side. She didn't talk much, but her silence wasn't empty. It was watchful, weighing, measuring. She shoveled the muck from the stalls, stacked wood by the kitchen door, and even dared to rub down one of the horses, though the mare tossed her head impatiently. Clara didn't flinch. Just whispered something low, words I couldn't catch, and the horse stilled. In the evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I caught her by the old fence that marked the north pasture. She stared at the hills, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. "Something wrong?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. But I'd seen the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her hand hovered near her belt. Old habits don't die easy. Days turned to weeks. Clara worked harder than anyone could have asked, but never complained, never asked for praise. Rosalind began to thaw, offering small kindnesses, a slice of bread still warm from the oven, an old coat patched at the elbows. Clara accepted these without thanks, but she wore the coat. At night, over coffee gone cold, I found myself watching her as she sat near the fire, eyes never quite at rest, flicking to every creak and shadow. "You're safe here," I told her once. She didn't look at me, only replied, "That's what folks say before something bad happens." One evening, as rain whispered against the windows, Clara slipped into the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. She hesitated by the table, then reached into the rags she called a dress and drew out something small, wrapped in a strip of cloth. Her eyes met mine, dark and unreadable, before she placed it on the table. A small leather-bound book, its cover cracked, corners worn smooth. She pushed it toward me. "I took this," she whispered. Her voice was low, hoarse with secrets. "From Raw. Names. Payments. The kind of things men kill to keep buried." I swallowed hard, the weight of what she'd done settling heavy in the room. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, shaking the windows in their frames. In that moment, I understood. This child wasn't just running from hunger or cruelty. She was running from men who'd see us all in the ground to get that book back. I lifted my eyes to hers. "You know what this means?" I asked. She nodded, a tiny motion, chin barely dipping. "They'll come," she said. And I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that she was right. The days that followed felt like standing on a frozen lake, hearing the ice groan beneath your boots, but not knowing when it might crack. Clara still rose before dawn, still worked until sweat streaked the dirt on her face, but now there was a new tension in her shoulders, a stiffness that spoke of watchful nights and haunted dreams. And truth be told, it wasn't just her. I felt it too. It started small, almost nothing at all. A snapped branch near the north pasture, fresh boot prints in the muddy path down by the creek. Could have been a drifter, I told myself, or a ranch hand cutting through early. But the feeling gnawed at me, an itch at the back of my skull that wouldn't quiet. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, I found Clara sitting on the split-rail fence, staring at the hills. The dying light caught the bruised yellow shadows under her eyes, proof enough she hadn't been sleeping. I leaned beside her, arms folded. "You see something out there?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "Maybe," she murmured, voice rough as gravel. "Sometimes I think I catch a flicker, like glass in the sun." "A spyglass," I said, the word tasting bitter. She nodded once. "Could be." We fell silent then, listening to the wind rattle the dry grass and the lowing of thin-ribbed cattle. For the first time in weeks, I realized just how small Silver Creek Ranch truly was, and how wide the world beyond its fences could stretch. That night, over a supper of beans and bread gone a little stale, I told Rosalind what Clara had shown me. The ledger, names scrawled in cramped hand, numbers that didn't add up to anything good. Rosalind's eyes hardened, the weariness in them replaced by a cold, quiet fear. "You think he'll come here?" she asked. "I don't think," I said. "I know." And Clara, sitting at the table's edge, shoulders hunched as if she could disappear into the shadows, whispered, "They won't stop. Not for me. Not for that book." After supper, I stepped out into the yard, lantern in hand. The air smelled of rain, sharp and electric. I checked the latch on the barn door, tested the hinges on the back gate, my eyes sweeping every dark patch where a man might hide. At the fence line, I paused, staring out at the hills. Somewhere out there, danger was already on the move, and my choices had brought it to our doorstep. The girl hadn't chosen this. Not really. Neither had Roslyn. But me. I'd sat at that table, laid down those cards, and invited the devil in. The days blurred after that. Clara kept working, never asking for more than a crust of bread or a word of direction. But every time she glanced at the tree line, her hand drifted to the pocket knife at her belt. At night, I heard her pacing the floor of the small room we'd given her, boards creaking under restless feet. One morning, while repairing a fence post, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Tracks. Not cattle, not horse, boots. Fresh, too. I crouched, pressing my palm to the print. Too deep for a passing traveler, and the pattern on the sole told me it wasn't a ranch hand. When I showed Clara, she didn't speak. Her face didn't change, but her eyes, they went darker, sharper. "He's close," she said. And that was all. That evening, Roslyn found me oiling the Winchester by lamplight. "Eli," she began, her voice quiet, "what if we ran, took the wagon, left the ranch?" "And go where?" I asked. "He'd follow. And I won't leave this place to him." I laid a hand on hers, calloused fingers brushing her wrist. "This is our home." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, though her eyes glistened in the lamplight. We didn't speak of it again. Clara surprised me then, stepping forward from the shadows by the hearth. "You should know something," she said, voice low. "I wasn't just running errands for Roar. I kept his ledgers, yes. But I also heard things. Things he did. People he hurt. Men buried in shallow graves outside Deadwood." My stomach turned. "Why tell me this now?" "Because if he comes," she said, "he won't stop with threats. He'll burn this place to the ground if it means getting that book back." I believed her. The next morning, I rode out to the western ridge, the highest point on our land, hoping for a better view. The wind bit at my face, cold and sharp. From up there, Silver Creek Ranch looked smaller than ever. A patch of fenced fields, a leaning barn, a tired house where two women now waited on the edge of something neither of them had asked for. In the distance, the trail snaked through the hills like an old scar. And there, half hidden by brush, I caught a flicker of metal. A rifle barrel? A spyglass? I couldn't be sure. But my heart clenched all the same. When I returned, Clara was splitting kindling by the barn. Sweat darkened her collar, but her eyes tracked my approach. "Saw something," I told her. She didn't ask what, just wiped her brow and said, "We need to be ready." That night, we sat around the kitchen table, the three of us. Clara spread the ledger on the rough wood, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "If Roar takes this back," she said, "I'm as good as dead. And so are you." Roslyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we don't let him take it." I glanced at the rifle propped by the door, the old revolver tucked under my belt. "We'll make our stand here," I said. Clara nodded, her chin lifting a fraction. "Then we'd better start now." And so we did. We braced the doors with timber, filled buckets with water in case of fire, and gathered what few weapons we had. Clara, barely more than skin and bone, stood beside me, knife in hand, her eyes burning not with fear, but something fiercer, resolve. Outside, the wind howled across the empty fields, and in that sound I thought I could almost hear bootsteps in the mud, drawing closer with every heartbeat. The die had been cast the night I'd sat at that table in Deadwood. Now, All we could do was wait for what would come. The days that followed felt like living in the breath before a storm, every hour stretched thin by waiting. We rose before dawn, not for the work of ranch life anymore, but for the work of survival. Clara moved through the house and yard with a quiet intensity, her small hands steady as she stacked firewood near the doors, sharpened knives until they glinted in the lamplight, and nailed boards across the lower windows. I'd watch her sometimes, forgetting for a moment she was barely more than a child. But the look in her eyes, the hard set of her jaw, reminded me this world had made her grow up faster than any child should. Rosalind surprised me too. Grief and hardship had left lines on her face, but not weakness. She cleared out the back room, pulling dusty crates to block the door and setting pots of boiling water on the stove. Old tricks from her grandmother, she said, in case men tried to come through. Scalding water stops most folk, she muttered, her voice low but steady. I watched her, feeling something twist in my chest. Pride, maybe, or shame that I'd brought this danger here. At night, we sat around the kitchen table, the three of us, the ledger lying between us like a loaded pistol. Its cracked leather cover and brittle pages didn't look like much, but it held secrets men would kill to keep buried. Clara's finger traced each name as if memorizing them, her lips moving silently. These names, she whispered once, they're worth more than gold, and twice as deadly. Sleep became a stranger. I'd doze in the chair by the window, Winchester across my knees, ears straining for footsteps on the porch boards or the creak of the barn door. Some nights, the wind played tricks, whispering through the eaves like voices. I'd wake with my heart pounding, the room still dark around me. One morning, I found Clara outside, standing barefoot in the mud, her thin frame barely cloaked by my old canvas duster. The sky was the color of tarnished silver, dawn still waiting below the hills. You should rest, I told her. She didn't turn, only shook her head. Can't. Too quiet. Her voice, rough and tired, sounded older than it had any right to. We spoke little during those days. Words felt clumsy against the weight of what waited beyond the fence line. But small moments still pierced the tension. Once, Rosalind baked a pan of cornbread, the smell filling the house with warmth. Clara took a piece, paused, then offered it to me first. Her eyes didn't soften, but the gesture spoke louder than kindness. Another day, as I mended a broken hinge on the barn door, Clara sat cross-legged in the dirt, humming under her breath. The tune was off-key, rough, but it was the first time I'd heard anything from her that wasn't edged in steel. When she realized I was listening, she stopped mid-note, her shoulders stiffening, but I pretended not to notice. Let her keep what little softness she had left. By the fourth day, signs of danger grew bolder. Fresh hoof prints circled the lower pasture. A broken fence rail, splintered as if struck by boot or fist. And near the creek, Clara found a spent cigar but still fresh enough to smell of smoke. She brought it to me, her hand trembling. "They're closer," she whispered. I didn't argue. That night, I gathered them both in the parlor. The fire burned low, casting shadows that danced on the walls. "If they come," I began, my voice heavy, "we don't run. We hold them here. Roslyn, you stay near the kitchen. If they force the door, you know what to do." She nodded, face pale but resolute. "And you," I turned to Clara, "you stay by me. You're quick. Use that." She opened her mouth as if to protest, but then closed it again. The girl who had once survived Deadwood's alleys knew the value of silence. The plan was simple because it had to be. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and far from any law worth trusting. But Silver Creek was ours, and I'd be damned before I let Roar or his men take it without a fight. In the small hours before dawn, Clara finally spoke of her time with Roar. Her voice was flat, eyes staring into the dying embers. "He taught me to count coins and read ledgers before I could read a prayer," she said. "Told me numbers were worth more than bullets." She paused, swallowing hard. "But bullets come quicker." Rosalind reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over Clara's. The girl flinched at first, then stilled, though her eyes stayed fixed on the fire. That brief contact spoke of something fragile growing between them, a trust neither dared name. When dawn broke, the sky hung low and sullen, clouds heavy with unshed rain. I saddled the old mare and rode the ridge again. From up there, I could see the trail winding out of Deadwood, a thin scar through the hills. And there, halfway between town and our gate, dust rose in slow, deliberate curls. They were coming. I returned to the ranch, breath sharp in my chest. "It's time," I told them. We bolted the doors, checked the water buckets, and counted our shells. Clara's hands shook as she loaded rounds into the old revolver, but her jaw stayed clenched. "Don't waste a shot," I reminded her. She only nodded, eyes dark as river stones. As the sun climbed higher, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of rain and fear. We waited, listening to every groan of the timbers, every distant hoofbeat that might belong to death riding closer. In that silence, I thought of the card table, of the girl with wolf eyes who'd stared me down over the stakes of her own freedom. I'd gambled that night thinking only of saving my ranch, but now, watching her stand beside me, knife in hand, chin lifted against the coming dark, I realized what I'd truly won, and what I might yet lose. Outside, crows circled above the fields, black flecks against the bruised sky. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the men who meant us harm were drawing near. The waiting was almost worse than the fight itself. Almost. The hours between knowing they were coming and seeing them arrive stretched like iron wire, thin and sharp enough to cut. I paced the porch boards until the wood groaned under my boots, each step measuring out a question I couldn't quiet. Had I done enough? Had I gambled right? Or had I only doomed us all for the price of a single card game? Clara hardly left my side. I watched her eyes, always scanning the horizon, pupils narrowed like a cat ready to pounce. The ledger stayed close to her chest, wrapped in oilskin and tucked into the folds of her coat. Sometimes I caught her fingers brushing over it, as if to remind herself it was still real, and still dangerous. Rosalind, meanwhile, became the spine of the house. She checked and rechecked the windows, lined every sill with bottles of lamp oil, and set an old hunting knife in the kitchen drawer where she could reach it quick. Her face was pale, but her movements were steady. There was a fierceness in her then, a glimpse of the woman I'd married before the land and loss had hollowed her out. By midday, the wind had shifted. It blew hard from the west, rattling the barn doors and carrying the sour tang of horses and sweat. I climbed the south fence and raised the spyglass, breath caught behind my teeth. Through the glass I saw them, 5 riders, dark shapes at first, then clearer, hats pulled low, dust masks over their faces, rifles slung casual but ready. At their center rode a man too straight in the saddle, too still, as if carved from hate and bone. Clay Raw. Even at a distance, his presence clawed at me like a nightmare reborn. The last time I'd seen him, his laughter had echoed through the saloon while Clara stood beside him, a prize wrapped in bruises. Now, he was coming to claim what he believed was his. I lowered the glass, my hands clammy. "They're here," I muttered. Clara stepped closer, her small frame rigid. "How many?" "5, I answered. "Raw at the center." She didn't flinch, only nodded once, like a soldier hearing the enemy's numbers. Back at the house, Rosalind met my gaze. "This is it, then." "It is," I said. "We hold them here." She wiped her hands on her apron, the motion calm, but her eyes betrayed the fear she swallowed down. "We've come this far," she whispered. "We won't run now." I gave her hand a squeeze before turning to Clara. "You know where to be." "By the west window," she recited, voice flat but sure. "Wait for your word before firing," I reminded her. She didn't answer, but her chin lifted, stubborn and unbowed. The wait felt endless, the minutes molten and slow. A single crow settled on the fence post, feathers slicked by wind, watching us with black, unblinking eyes. In that stillness, I realized how small the ranch truly was, how a lifetime of sweat and hope could fit inside these sagging fences and worn timbers. Then, hoofbeats. Slow at first, then louder, the rhythm of doom itself. Dust rose in curling waves as the riders drew near, the sunlight flashing off rifle barrels and boot spurs. I took my place on the porch, Winchester balanced across my knees. Behind me, through the window, I saw Clara crouched low, eyes sharp and ready. Rosalind stood by the stove, the kettle steaming beside her, hands curled around the handle of the pot. The riders stopped a dozen yards from the porch, horses stamping and snorting. Clay Raw sat still as stone, his coat black as midnight, a mockery of a gentleman's smile curling his lips. "Turner," he drawled, voice slick as oil, "you've got something of mine." I didn't rise, only tilted my head. "Don't recall your brand on anything here, Raw." His smile thinned. "The girl, Turner, and the book she stole. Hand them over, and maybe I'll leave you breathing." Clara's eyes never left him. From where she crouched, her fingers curled tighter around the revolver's grip, knuckles whitening. I spat into the dirt. "You'll get neither. Not today." Raw's gaze slid over the house, measuring, cold and practiced. "You always were a fool for lost causes," he murmured, almost soft. Then his eyes hardened. "Burn it to the ground." His men moved in a single motion, rifles lifted, torches pulled from saddlebags. Fire blossomed at the end of cloth rags, smoke rising like a black prayer. "Now!" I barked. The first shot cracked the silence, echoing off the hills. Clara's revolver kicked in her small hand, the bullet slamming into the chest of the nearest rider. He tumbled backward off his horse, the torch falling into the mud. Chaos swallowed the yard. My Winchester roared, the stock bucking against my shoulder. I felt, rather than saw, Rosalind hurl boiling water through the doorway, a man's scream tearing the air. Smoke coiled into the house, bitter and blinding. The second rider fired back, the bullet biting into the porch post inches from my face. Splinters stung my cheek, hot and sharp. I racked the lever, aimed, and fired again. The man crumpled, his rifle skittering across the dirt. Through the haze, I glimpsed Clara, moving low and quick between windows, eyes locked on Raw. He sat still atop his horse, unmoving, watching the fight unfold like a man waiting for a clock to chime. Rosalind's cry ripped my focus back. A man had reached the door, boots crunching over broken glass. His face twisted with hate, shotgun raised. Before I could swing the Winchester, a sharp report split the air. The man jerked, eyes wide, and fell forward into the threshold. Clara stood behind him, smoke rising from her revolver, breath ragged but eyes unbroken. For a heartbeat, child and killer blurred together in her gaze. The yard reeked of gunpowder and blood. Horses screamed and fled, shadows dancing between the smoke. 3 of Raw's men lay motionless. Only one remained, crouched behind the water trough, rifle peeking out. Then Raw moved. He dismounted slow, deliberate, boots sinking into the mud. His hand rested on the ivory grip of a pistol, but he didn't draw. Instead, he lifted his gaze to me, hate burning in its depths. "You cost me men, Turner," he rasped. Cost me coin. But you won't cost me what's mine. Before I could answer, Clara stepped out from behind the door, revolver raised. Her voice, thin but iron-hard, cut the air. You're not getting the book, Raw. He turned his head toward her, surprise flickering across his features. Brave words for a gutter rat, he sneered. I've been called worse, she shot back. The standoff coiled tight, each breath stretching into forever. My finger tightened on the trigger, sweat stinging my eyes. Then, the final rider broke cover, charging toward the porch, rifle spitting flame. Wood splintered, Rosalind screamed, and the world dissolved into fire and thunder. The world fractured in an instant. Splinters, smoke, the thunder of gunfire rolling through my chest like a drumbeat of death. I threw myself sideways off the porch, shoulders striking mud hard enough to steal my breath. The Winchester tumbled from my grip, but instinct took over before thought could catch up. Clara's scream cut the air, raw and sharp. My heart lurched, but I couldn't see her through the smoke boiling from the porch roof, flames licking along the eaves where a torch had caught. The acrid burn of burning wood and oil clawed at my throat. Rosalind staggered backward through the doorway, apron dark with soot, eyes wide and wild. Her gaze locked on mine for a single heartbeat, and then the last of Raw's men charged from behind the water trough, hat gone, hair matted to a blood-slicked forehead. His rifle swung up toward Rosalind's chest. I shouted, voice breaking, feet slipping in the churned mud. Too slow. The shot cracked, deafening. Rosalind stumbled, a red bloom spreading across her blouse, breath catching in a small, stunned gasp. She crumpled to her knees, hand splayed across the wound. Rage, cold and absolute, swallowed the world. I lunged for the Winchester, mud sucking at my boots. The rifle felt heavier than iron in my grip, but my hands remembered their work. I swung it up and fired. The man's eyes went wide, then empty, as he collapsed face first into the mud. I dropped the Winchester, legs shaking, breath rasping like broken glass in my lungs. Rosalind! I crashed onto the porch beside her, splinters biting my palms. Her skin felt hot and slick under my hands. Blood soaked through my fingers faster than I could press it back. Stay with me, Rose, I rasped. Stay, damn you. Her lips moved, soundless, then finally found breath. Clara, the girl. Her eyes flickered, then fixed on something behind me. I twisted, just in time to see Clara step through the smoke, her revolver dangling from numb fingers, face pale as bone. Tears streaked lines through the soot on her cheeks, but her eyes stayed hard. Too hard for a child. He's still out there, she whispered, voice brittle. Raw. I saw him. Waiting. Behind her, the porch roof sagged, flames crawling along the beams. Heat roared in my ears, but Rosalind's gaze anchored me, tethered me to the moment. Her fingers curled weakly into my sleeve. Don't let her go, she breathed. She's ours now. Rose. But the words stuck in my throat as her body slackened, breath leaving her in a soft, final sigh. For a moment, the world went silent. Even the fire's roar seemed to fade. I felt the weight of her, heavier in death than in life, and something inside me cracked, clean through. Clara dropped to her knees beside us, eyes locked on Rosalind's still face. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice small and breaking. I'm so sorry. I wanted to say it wasn't her fault, that none of this was. But my tongue felt like stone, grief choking every word. Then the silence shattered, boots crunching on the burned porch boards. I lifted my head, vision swimming through heat and tears. Clay Raw stood there, pistol loose in his grip, coat singed at the hem. His eyes burned with something darker than hate. Conviction, maybe. the unshakable belief that the world owed him its submission. "I warned you, Turner," he drawled, voice raw but steady. "You took what was mine. And this," his gaze flicked to Rosalind's body, dismissive as a man brushing dust from a sleeve, "is the price." My hands curled into fists, knuckles splitting against the splintered boards. Clara's breath hitched beside me, shoulders tight, as if every word from Raw flayed her raw. "You still have a choice," he went on, stepping closer. Smoke curled around him, firelight painting demons on his face. "Give me the ledger. Give me the girl. Walk away. Live. Live." I rasped, voice barely more than gravel. "With what left?" He tilted his head, as if pity might crawl its way into his expression. "Some folks are built for surviving, Turner, not winning." I rose, slowly, knees trembling. Clara did too, though the revolver in her hand quivered. My gaze found hers, and in that flicker of a second, I saw it. The guilt, the fear, and under it all, the stubborn spark Rosalind had seen too. "No," I whispered. "We're done running." Raw's eyes narrowed, cold fury blooming behind them. His gun came up. I lunged forward, arms sweeping out to shove Clara behind me. The shot cracked, pain lancing through my side, hot and deep. I staggered, breath torn from my lungs. But Clara moved like lightning. The revolver kicked in her hand, and a bloom of red burst across Raw's chest. His expression froze, disbelief etched across his features, then softened almost peacefully as his knees buckled. Raw fell, pistol slipping from slack fingers, breath rattling once before silence swallowed him. Smoke billowed thicker around us, flames licking up the porch posts. My vision blurred at the edges, pain clawing at every breath. Clara's hands grabbed my arm, her voice shaking. "Eli, we have to move. Please." I let her pull me, each step agony, the ledger clutched to her chest like a beating heart. Behind us, the house groaned, timbers splitting under heat, the porch collapsing in a shower of sparks. We stumbled into the yard, bodies littering the mud, horses fled, fence posts scorched. The sky above had turned ash-grey, the sun a red smear through drifting smoke. I fell to my knees, blood soaking my shirt, the world tilting around me. Clara dropped beside me, her small hands pressed against my wound, panic battling focus in her eyes. "Stay awake," she begged. "You can't leave too. Not you." I forced a breath, the pain so sharp it blacked the edges of my sight. But her face, filthy, tear-streaked, stubborn, anchored me. "I'm here," I croaked. "I'm here, kid." The fire behind us roared higher, consuming what remained of our home. And through the smoke and ruin, I saw what Rosalind had meant. Clara wasn't just something to protect. She was the fight itself, the last defiant refusal to bow. I laid my hand over hers, voice low and ragged. "We ain't done yet." She nodded, jaw clenched, eyes like iron. Around us, the ranch burned, but somewhere in the distance, beyond the smoke, lay something that hadn't yet been taken. Hope. The fire behind us roared like a living beast, its heat burning our backs as we stumbled into the open fields. My vision swam with every heartbeat, pain lancing deep into my ribs where Raw's bullet had found its mark. Each breath came ragged, as though my lungs had been scrubbed raw by the smoke. Clara half-dragged, half-guided me across the churned mud of the yard, her thin arm shockingly strong around my waist. The ledger was still clutched to her chest, pressed tight as though it were her own heartbeat. The burned-out husk of our home crackled behind us, and somewhere deeper, a timber snapped and fell with a final hiss of sparks. "Keep moving," she whispered, breath sharp and urgent. "We have to get away before they come again." I tried to answer, but words stuck like ash in my throat. My mind spun backward instead, memories pulling me in like an undertow. Rosalind's laughter echoing in the kitchen when the morning sun caught her hair just so. The way the ranch smelled at dawn, coffee, dust, and wild grass. Clara, just days ago, scowling at the chore list Rosalind handed her, but doing every task anyway. Gone. All gone in the space of a few gunshots and a fire lit by greed. The pain nearly buckled me, but Clara's voice broke through. "Eli, look at me." I forced my gaze to her face, smeared with soot and tears, yet fiercely alive. "Don't you dare fall now," she snapped, voice cracking but unyielding. "You brought me out. You don't get to quit." The world blurred, edges smeared by sweat and blood, but her words cut clear as steel. I swallowed hard, nodding once. "All right, kid," I rasped. "All right." We staggered across the field toward the tree line beyond the far pasture, feet sinking in mud still slick from last night's rain. The pasture fence loomed ahead, half-burnt, its rails charred and broken. Clara dropped the ledger into the crook of her arm, braced both hands on my side, and heaved me up and over the lowest rail. My landing jarred the wound, white-hot pain flaring so sharp I nearly blacked out. The ground seemed to tip, horizon sliding sideways, but Clara shook me hard. "Stay awake," she hissed. "Just a little further." Beyond the fence, the land fell into a shallow gully, overgrown with sage and scrub. We half-slid down the slope, dirt clinging to sweat-soaked skin. At the bottom, Clara lowered me into a hollow, hidden from the ranch yard by a rise of earth and tangled brush. I collapsed against a half-buried log, breath coming in shallow, painful gulps. Clara crouched beside me, eyes scanning the smoke-filled horizon. Her hands, so small and scratched, moved to press cloth torn from her skirt against my bleeding side. "Sorry," she murmured as I winced. "It's gonna hurt." "Already does," I managed, forcing a ragged laugh that came out as a cough. The taste of iron flooded my mouth. Her eyes flickered to my face, softening for the briefest second. Then the mask slid back into place, calm, calculating. "We can't stay long," she said, voice quiet. "If Raw had more men, they'll come when the fire dies." I nodded, though each movement felt like grinding bone. "The ledger," I rasped. "You still got it?" She held it up, spine cracked, pages smudged, but intact. "Never let it go," she said. "Good," I whispered. "That book's worth more than land, more than cattle. It's leverage." Her jaw tightened. "Or a death sentence." "Both," I agreed. My vision pulsed black at the edges. "Clara, listen to me. If I can't—" "No," her voice cut sharp as a blade. "Don't. You have to know." "I know," she snapped, tears threatening again. "But you're not dying. Not here. Not now." I let the words fade. Strength drained from me, each heartbeat slower than the last, but her stubbornness sparked something stubborn in me too. I'd lived through worse, or close enough to convince myself I had. Minutes stretched, measured by the rasp of my breath and the distant groan of burning timbers. Clara never sat still. She checked the ridge, the pasture, the tree line, always scanning. Dirt streaked her face, sweat darkened her hair, but those wolf eyes never lost focus. "I remember," I murmured, voice so faint even I barely heard it. "Remember what?" she asked, glancing back. "First time I saw you. In that saloon. You looked at me like you already knew how the hand would play out." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Maybe I did." I closed my eyes, just for a breath. In the dark behind my lids, I saw Rosalind's face again. Then roars. Then fire. "Promise me," I whispered. If I fall, you keep running. Use the ledger. Buy safety. No, she said again, fiercer this time. I don't run anymore. Before I could answer, a branch cracked on the ridge above. Clara froze, hand dropping to the revolver at her belt. Her eyes found mine, pupils wide, fear and resolve dancing in equal measure. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moved through the brush. My heart pounded, breath catching in my throat. Clara pressed closer to the earth, shoulders coiled like a hunting cat. The ledger slid under her arm, gun ready in her small, scratched hand. Through the haze, pain, and smoke, a single thought burned brighter than fear. I wasn't the only fighter left. She was ready. The air between heartbeats felt longer than minutes. My breath caught in my throat, lungs burning like the last ember of a dying fire. Above us, the crunch of boots on dry twigs and stone moved closer. Clara didn't speak, didn't breathe loud enough to stir a leaf. Those wolf eyes of hers locked on the ridge, cold and sharp. My hand twitched toward the Winchester beside me, but my strength was all but gone. Pain washed over me in dizzying waves, each pulse threatening to drag me under. The wound in my side had slowed its bleeding but not stopped. Death lurked close, patient as a coyote waiting for the last warmth to fade. Then a voice cut the air. Low, drawling, unmistakable. I know you're down there, girl, Raw called. You think you're clever, but I taught you most of what you know. Clara's shoulders stiffened. For the first time I saw her hesitate, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, older. The chain that still tied her past to his voice. I've got 5 men with rifles trained on that hollow, Raw continued, words slick as oil. Step out nice and slow. Bring me the ledger, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let the old man keep breathing. Her gaze flickered to me, and I shook my head. It felt heavy as stone, but I forced the motion anyway. Don't, I mouthed. Raw waited, silence stretching thin as glass. Then Clara rose, not fully, just enough to make her voice carry. You taught me lies, she called back, steady despite the tremor in her chest. And I learned truth on my own. A bark of laughter echoed above. Truth, Raw sneered. Girl, you wouldn't know truth if it bit you. You're nothing without me. A street rat that found a barn and thought it was a palace. I saw her jaw tighten. For a breath, the fear slipped back into her eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by something fierce. You're wrong, she said, voice dropping low so only I could hear. I'm not nothing. In one motion, she slipped the ledger into my lap, pressed the revolver into my hand. If I go down, you burn it, she whispered. Promise. My fingers curled around the grip. Promise, I croaked, though my hand felt as heavy as iron. Then she stood fully, stepping out from cover. The morning sun struck her face, smudged with soot and dirt, eyes bright and unyielding. Looking for me? She called, voice loud enough to echo through the gully. Atta girl, Raw drawled. His shape moved from shadow to light, hat tipped back, grin spread across his face like a snake bearing fangs. Behind him, shapes shifted, hired guns, rifles half raised. You got something of mine, he said, each word dripping with practiced charm and hidden threat. Clara shook her head. You got it wrong. I had something of yours. Now it's mine. Raw's smile thinned. Do you even know what's in that book? Those names could buy us both 100 lifetimes. I know exactly what it is, Clara shot back. It's proof. It's everything you did to people who couldn't fight back. Raw's laugh cracked the stillness. And what do you plan to do, wolf cub? Take it to the law. The sheriff's in my pocket. Judges too. You can't win this game. Clara stepped closer, boots crunching dry leaves. Maybe. But you can't unburn what's written. Something in Raw's expression twitched. His hand drifted toward his holster, and for the first time, his words lost their slickness. "Give me the book, girl," he growled. She didn't flinch. "Come and take it." Time broke like glass. Raw's hand moved. Clara's too. Her pistol barked once, the sound tearing the air apart. Raw staggered, surprise frozen on his face, then anger boiling up in its place. His gun came free. I lifted the Winchester, sight wavering like heat over sand. My finger closed around the trigger. The rifle roared. Raw jerked backward, hat flying, the grin wiped from his face. His gun fell from numb fingers, clattering onto stone. The look he gave Clara in that final breath was something between disbelief and a curse. Then he crumpled to the earth. For a moment, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause, the smoke drifting lazy and indifferent. Then the spell broke. The men behind Raw shouted, some dropping to cover, some raising rifles. Clara threw herself down beside me, hands grabbing the Winchester to rack another round. "Stay low," she hissed. Gunfire cracked overhead, splintering branches and kicking dirt. Clara's face was tight with terror and something beyond it, determination. She crawled forward, propping the rifle against the log. I wanted to stop her, to tell her to run, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I watched as she squeezed the trigger, shoulders jarring from the shot. One of Raw's men pitched sideways, a strangled cry tearing from his throat. Another shot from Clara. Missed, but it kept them from advancing. My vision blurred, blood loss pulling me under. Sounds became distant, Clara's ragged breathing, the sharp clack of the rifle bolt, the curses from men in the trees. Through it all, one thought burned clear. She wasn't running. Not anymore. They fired back, bullets whipping so close I felt heat on my cheek. Clara barely flinched, working the rifle like she'd done it all her life. Somewhere beyond pain, I felt a ragged pride. Whatever happened next, she'd chosen her ground. Then a shout rose from the trees. Panic, not triumph. The hired guns broke, scattering like leaves before a storm. Clara lowered the rifle, chest heaving, confusion clouding her face. From the tree lean, shapes emerged. Townsfolk, neighbors who'd ridden at the sound of gunfire. Shotguns, pitchforks, old muskets in shaking hands, but enough to turn hired killers into fleeing shadows. Clara turned to me, breathless. "They came," she whispered, as if it didn't seem real. "Course they did," I rasped. "This land's rough, but folks stand together." She looked at me, eyes bright and wet. Then the strength in her legs vanished, and she collapsed beside me, burying her face in my shoulder. The ranch smoldered behind us, black scars across the land, but we were still here. Bruised, bloodied, but breathing. And for the first time, I saw the truth in those wolf eyes. Not just hunger to survive, but a will to fight. To belong. In the distance, smoke curled into the brightening sky. And for a breath, hope rose with it. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the ruined remains of Silver Creek Ranch. The fire had burned itself out, leaving behind only ashes and memories. I leaned back against a scorched fence post, every breath a reminder of the night's chaos. Clara sat beside me, still shaky but alive. Her wolf eyes scanned the horizon, wary but defiant. Around us, neighbors and townfolk gathered, their faces a mix of sympathy and concern. The ledger, the key to everything, lay open on a nearby stump. Names, dates, and sins inked in black and white, proof that could topple men like Raw. But it was also a beacon, drawing danger closer with every passing hour. Roslyn arrived, her eyes swollen from tears but fierce as ever. She took Clara's hand without a word, and I felt a strange weight lift. We weren't alone anymore. But the battle was far from over. Raw's shadow loomed heavy, and the law, corrupt and silent. We had to decide, run again, or stand our ground and fight for the future. I looked at Clara and Roslyn, survivors forged in fire. The gamble we took at that poker table wasn't just about a girl or a ranch anymore. It was about redemption, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to rebuild what we almost lost. Days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and dread. The ranch was scarred but standing, and so were we, though barely. Clara worked like a shadow, moving through the chores with quiet grit, but every night I caught the flicker of worry behind those wolf eyes. The ledger weighed heavy between us, a silent reminder of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Raw wasn't finished. Word spread that his men were gathering in Deadwood, tightening their grip on the town. They whispered threats, promises of vengeance that carried in the cold wind. The sheriff, once a distant figure, now openly sided with the corrupt, leaving us with no law to trust. Roslyn and I stayed awake late into the night, planning, counting what little we had left. There was no choice. We had to prepare. If Raw wanted a war, we'd give him one he'd never forget. Clara, though young, was no longer the scared girl I met. She was a fighter, a survivor. Watching her mount that horse at dawn, resolve carved into every line of her face, I felt a strange pride. The gamble had cost us much, but maybe it had bought us something more, hope. Tomorrow, the fight for Silver Creek would begin. The dawn broke cold and grey over Silver Creek Ranch, the kind of morning that promised nothing but hard truths and harder choices. We stood together, Roslyn, Clara, and me, each carrying the weight of the night before and the storm that was coming. The ledger, still folded tight in my coat pocket, was our last weapon and our biggest risk. The men came like shadows at noon, Raw's hired guns, rough faces set in grim determination. They expected fear, a quick surrender. Instead, they found something they hadn't counted on, a family forged in fire and grit. We held our ground. Every shot fired a declaration. Clara moved with deadly precision, her rifle steady as if it was an extension of her will. Roslyn's hands, once soft from years of hope, were now steady and fierce, wielding a shotgun like a shield. I fired the Winchester with all the strength I had left, but it wasn't just the weapons that won us this day. It was the will to survive, to protect what was ours. The ledger became more than paper. It became truth laid bare, whispered between gunfire and grit. When the last shot faded and silence fell over the ruined fields, Raw's reign of fear was over. The law, the town, even the land itself had shifted. Clara looked at me then, those wolf eyes softer now, a spark of something like peace. We had gambled everything, our lives, our pasts, our very souls, and against all odds we'd won. But the real victory was what came after, the slow, steady work of building a life worth fighting for, together. Silver Creek wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a promise. And as the sun finally broke through the clouds, I knew one thing with every breath. This was just the beginning. If you were in his shoes, would you fight the same fight? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video. Explore the other videos on your screen. There are more stories waiting for you.